everyone. I am delighted to become your moderator today. Our topic, probably everyone has already read. It is on mysticism and pluralism. There are three speakers. I'm going to reverse. Dr. Mann is going to be the first speaker. Dr. Mann is going to give a talk on the Sikh and the Abrahamic traditions. The title is very enticing. I'm curious what it is about. Dr. Mann is a very accomplished scholar in his field. He, for some years, taught at Columbia University from 1987 to 1999. He also became the chair of, please excuse my pronunciation, Kundan Kor Kapani Chair. You can explain later on what it is about, at University of California, Santa Barbara, and he just retired. He has a lot of books published by well-known publishers, Harvard University, Oxford University, and also Punjabi University. Dr. Mann also co-edited Brill Encyclopedia of Sikhism, published by Brill. Without any further ado, I would like to give the time to Dr. Mann, and we are looking forward to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anwer, for that very kind introduction. I would just like to start with the joke that my wife had when my Harvard University book was published. We were having dinner and she counted 3 names and said, "Name the 4th person who will ever read this book." And my answer to that was, if these 3 people read it, why do I need the 4th person? So that's the kind of work I have done. Thank you very much. And in some ways, I think what is more important that I'd like to mention is that my family came from Pakistan to India in 1947. And I was born in 1949, and the Muslim family friends used to come from Lailpur to visit us. So as a little boy growing up in the 1950s, we always used to wait for Chacha Ramzan to come and visit us. So that kind of environment I grew up in, and then went to a Christian college, and my mentor was a Presbyterian missionary. And then I ended up in the US, and on the way, I was very fortunate to spend 18 months in the Holy Land in 3 sort of different laps. And so that way lived in the Middle East, lived in Europe, lived in the US, both on the East and West Coast. And have seen the interfaith situation function. Just last week, when I was having my morning walk, I saw a young lady coming, and I could see that she took her earplug off, and that gave me the indication that she wants to talk to me. So I was on my alert, and she said, "Is your family still back home?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I am so sorry they are bombarding your area so badly." So very interesting interfaith situation. When I thought, when she's asking me if my family is still back home, she would have read the COVID situation in India, because New York Times has been covering, and she was referring to the Gaza. So that has been happening, you know, walking in Manhattan, people saying, Assalamu alaikum, and my very warmly responding to them, saying, Walaikum salam. There is no time to tell who I am or what is going on, but Walaikum salam. And I do remember in Jerusalem on some tense days, it was several times it happened to me that somebody would stop me and say, hey, Ata Yehudi, are you Jewish? And by the time I had learned to speak Hebrew, so I would say, Ma ta khushev, what do you think? So I didn't answer the question, but whoever was on the other side thought that if I asked that, that means I must be some kind of Jew from somewhere. So the interfaith situation as it is lived and interfaith situation as it's being talked about, you know, I have sort of confronted both these realities, and they are interesting in their own ways. And what I was hoping to speak to you today, and Professor Shafiq was very kind first to invite me and then give me the permission that I have some sort of general conversation with you about the Sikhs, who they are, and where do they really fit in? And in some ways, the situation is quite interesting and quite intriguing for me. So we will have a presentation on Modi's India. And in that context, I take you back. What I'd like to offer you is some sort of slice of empirical reality without giving my commentary. And if you have questions, you can ask me. So let me take you to the sort of the 1469 to 1539. That is the period of the founder of the Sikh tradition. His name is Nanak, and he called himself Baba Nanak. More than 40 times in his composition, he calls himself Baba Nanak, and I will use these terms underlining the point that Baba is Farsi word. Whenever I use word, please, note, this is, you take it for granted, or people do, that the Sikhs have emerged from South Asia. So they have to be from there, but South Asia is South Asia, and the area my tradition grew up in is called the Punjab, another Farsi word. And, a scholar wrote a book called Islam at the Periphery. And he was thinking of Bengal and the present day Pakistan. And I was sort of joking with him, periphery of what? Because Pakistan is also next to Kabul. So in a way, periphery of that world too. So in a way, Punjab is at the periphery, very much knitted into the Silk Route and Iran and Pakistan. So if Banaras is 300 miles from the center of Sikh sacred geography, Amritsar, Kabul is more or less the same, little more. So the location, and he is born in a small village, who is established by an upper caste Hindu convert to Islam. So as we have the know that the village planning of that time, what would be at the center? The center would be the mosque. And what would that mean? Call for prayer 5 times a day. And whether you were a Muslim or a Hindu, there is no way not to listen to that prayer. So there were some Hindu families too. Nanak's family was a Hindu family. They had a temple, Vaishnava temple, it looks like. So Nanak grew up going both to madrasa and to the Vaishnava temple, where he learned the Devanagari, the scripts, Devanagari and Arabic script. And he grew up. He came from a well-connected family. His father worked for the chief of the village. And what he did was to collect revenue and then take it to Lahore twice a year. So what does it mean? A well-connected family, an affluent family with the property, education, and some contact with Lahore, that as a little boy, Nanak would have gone with his father to Lahore. It wasn't that far. And while at Lahore, which at that point in time was the cultural center of that region, he would have seen Lahore, the cultural facet of that town, as well as the political establishment which was centered there. It was the state headquarters, the Suba headquarters, and so on. And Nanak gets married into more or less the same type of family which he had. And then he moves to, so the village of his childhood is a Muslim village, and he moves to a town named Sultanpur. Sultan again, as you know, the word comes from, again, the western side. So it's the district headquarters, and the Shikhdar there is the uncle of the emperor in Delhi. So it's not an ordinary district. It's a very special district. And Nanak had close ties with the governor. He worked with the Shikhdar. He worked for that for about 10 years. So 20 years in the Muslim village, followed by 10 years in Sultanpur, where he met all sorts of important people, aristocrats, political figures, army figures, and all other itinerant people who passed by the area. And around 1500, the district chief is made the Subedar of Lahore. So somebody for whom Nanak worked is now the second most powerful political figure in the region. After the emperor in Delhi, he is the next man. Lahore is the center of power. And so just the fact that he knew the person, now Nanak has to decide, the boss has moved to Lahore, and he had several options. But this is where mysticism comes in. Nanak undergoes a powerful experience. He sings about it. He tells us that he was taken to the divine court. And the term used is dargah, Farsi term. He's taken to the dargah, and he is commanded by God to go back to the earth and spread the divine word. Terms are again largely from Farsi. So what happens at that point, Nanak leaves his job, and he has a companion, a Muslim, a Hindu convert to Islam again, called Mardana. And Nanak sends his wife and children back to his home and spends the next 20-some years traveling around. Now, where did he go? We don't need to get bogged down by those details as to where he went, but obviously for 20-some years, he traveled around. And why am I telling you this story? This story I have sort of, in a way, taken out, culled out from the contemporary sources. This is not something which you would read if you access a book on the Sikhs. Readings would be very different. The narrative would be very different. But these 20-some years, Nanak with Mardana, they travel around, they visit religious centers, they visit other centers, and then political centers, trade centers. And the model here is not that of ascetic traveling, but the model here is that of a rich merchant traveling. And the term is saudagar, another Farsi term. So 20-some years, and then what happens? This is the time when Mir Babur, the chief of Kabul, decides to look, all his efforts to go the Silk route way did not work out. So he looks toward the east, and he, in the next few years, he would capture Delhi. So this is now 1520. Nanak is about 50 years old. As far as his cultural capital is concerned, it's very impressive, starting with his education, affluence, resources at his disposal, that direct link with the most powerful political figure of the region. And coming of Mir Babur, with the coming of Mir Babur, Nanak undergoes another very powerful experience. And in that experience, he realizes that India, Hindustan, the term is used as Hindustan. Hindustan is going to have a new beginning. And Mir Babur is instrumental in bringing a shift into the political scene. And Nanak takes himself to be assigned the mission. These terms are again important, to be assigned the mission of bringing some radical shift on the religious scene. So what does he do? He acquires a large piece of land and establishes a new village there. And the term used is muqam, another Farsi term, muqam. So the first thing he does when he has reached the decision to establish a new community is to acquire a muqam. And there he goes, builds his house, and people gather around him, and village comes into its being. He spends 20-some years there, establishes a community. Now, three things which I'd like to mention. So the first, we have already done. The muqam is a place. Sikhs are very concerned about the sacred geography. Geography is extremely important to him. Second is, even the location tells us a lot about what kind of mission he had in mind. So it's in a beautiful, fertile location where you see the snow-covered peaks of the Himalayas, and you have this perennial river flowing by the village, fertile land, 70 feet of clay without a stone. And I used to joke with my students, what does that mean? Tropical climate, 70 feet of clay without a stone, you throw a banana, and the next day there will be a banana tree. That's the kind of land we're talking about in all its beauty. And why is this physical setting important to him? Because now here, the belief system comes into the picture. He is a monotheist. We are talking of South Asia, but we are also talking of the part of South Asia where Islam has been around for 500 plus years. And at that time, Indus was navigable. So if we keep that in mind, Punjab had links with the Islamic world since 734. So what are we dealing with here? Nanak, a person born in a Vaishnava Hindu family, but traveling, getting educated, and then through these two very powerful mystical experiences, reaching the decision of his life that he had to start a new community, and he starts a new community, and that community is constructed around very clear, radically monotheistic understanding of the divinity. Now, what is the communication? Nanak, he was a poet, he was a singer. We have compositions of about 90,000 words. And in that, we know about his beliefs. So, what are we dealing with? A personal God to whom human beings pray. And no matter which book you open, they will tell you Nanak was part of the Bhakti Renaissance that undertook medieval India, but that term doesn't even appear with any significance in his compositions. While he uses the Farsi term bandagi, which is, yes, bandagi, bhakti, comparative terms, but his word, his imagination, religious imagination is different. And he writes his compositions down. He's creating a new community with all the sort of what we call nascent institutional arrangements. He writes his compositions. He creates a kitab. Now, in the Indian sense, kitab, when we talk of the kitab, the Quran is the model. So he creates that, and before he dies, that kitab is assigned the authority, the highest authority within the community. So here is a religion based on monotheism, pure monotheism, has a book right from its very inception, and that book expands over time. And then the third pillar, if one may say, is the community. The Sikhs have always seen themselves as the Panth. They call it the Panth. That comes from Sanskrit, but in Sanskrit, it means a path, while in Punjabi, the language in which Nanak wrote, it means a community, a group of people. So what do we see during that time, 20 years, the last 20 years of Nanak's life? Gathering people, which in a way, if we see, would be an elaborate and expanded version of what we would see Khangah or Dargah. Khangah or Dargah would be at the periphery of an establishment. And here the establishment itself is in the mold of Khanka, and then he passes on his volume of compositions, his kitab, his pothi, 2 words used for that, to his successor, and then the tradition grows. Now, I know my time seems to be reaching 20 minutes, so what, when Professor Shafiq invited me, the first thing I did was get this book and enjoyed reading it. Enjoyed reading it very much. And now what I'd like you to see is, how does the Sikh symbol fit into this? Can you all see? Now, what is this symbol? This is, it might look as the crescent, moon crescent, but it is Farsi word deg, a cauldron in which you cook food. You know, the Sikhs are famous for administering the langars. Everybody knew the food they ate in the Parliament of World Religions. That was the, whoever was there talked to me about the langar. So the round thing which you see is the deg, and the center is the teg, the double-edged sword. So what is Nanak's agenda? In the community he established, deg, everybody should eat, social welfare, and teg, everybody should get justice. So these are the 2 basic things which the tradition has sort of kept up. And you would, now and then you will see them swording around in the Punjab and the other parts and so on, and the langar. So my appeal to you would be that, you've been around for some years, and I, somehow my ways didn't cross with you. And I see this as some sort of divine intervention where I got in touch with you. And in the days ahead, if I could, there are 3 symbols of each of the 3 traditions. And I was just thinking, if somewhere you are open to having this, I would be very grateful. And anytime I could provide information about the Sikhs, please remember me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mann. I come from Indonesia. When I was little, we learned about Sikhism. And because in Indonesia, guru is important, the word guru, right? Teacher. And we call it guru, we call him Guru Nanak. So thank you for your speech and your willingness to explain to us and share to us the story of a man with inspiration for so many people in the world. And I honestly, I just learned today about the whole connection to Islam to Judeo-Christian tradition. Your story itself is very, very interesting. I thought you could go on explaining about your story. As for your presentation, I would like to invite the audiences to ask directly to the speaker. There is Patricia who could help to unmute, or on our chat, comments probably, or anything like that. In the meantime, I would like to ask Dr. Dolin Smith to welcome Dr. Mann, and also to show him our commitment that the symbol is going to be in the book. That's, I think, the most important part. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I really appreciated that. I've never heard the story of Nanak told in that way, in that kind of insider and detailed account. That was wonderful for me. I learned so much from you. Thank you very much. And yes, as for inclusion of Sikhs in the Hickey Center work and the conferences of the future, we're all for that. Sometimes we struggle to find participants to represent all the points of view that we would like to include, but well, we have your number now, don't we?
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
I had a question, if you would not mind.
Please.
As I think about the stories of founders of these great traditions, and the followers are, of course, interested in the teachings. What did Jesus teach? What did Buddha teach? What did Muhammad teach? But they're also, of course, fascinated by the character of these persons. And they love Muhammad, they love Jesus, they love Buddha. What would you say would be the virtues, the character traits of Nanak that a Sikh would look to and revere and try to emulate? When Christians talk about trying to be Christ-like, they try to be like the founder. What would be the qualities of Nanak that a Sikh would try to emulate?
So the three teachings which the Sikhs would associate with Baba Nanak would be Naam, Dan, Ishnan, three terms. Then Naam would mean keeping God in constant remembrance. Dan literally means charity, which would mean social obligation. This is not just social, it has theological roots. God is giving, and you need to work hard and share the fruits of your hard labor. And then Ishnan would be the personal purity. This body is in a way a divine gift, and you have the obligation to take care of it. And in other words, this is probably the Sikhs would be a unique example where asceticism has absolutely no place. Asceticism of any kind, it's you need to work hard. I didn't have time to go into how agriculture was adopted as the means of sustenance in that community that Baba Nanak established. Nature is extremely important because that is where you see the divine. So Nanak sings about that are visual images, the beautiful environment. There are, audial images of the birds singing. There is a fragrance of the green leaves washed by the rain, and so on. But that would be the model. So what did Nanak enshrine in his being? The Naam, social, divine remembrance, social obligation, and asceticism, personal purity, and what one would say dignified living. And in some ways, your question is very important. The Sikhs began to write about the life of Baba Nanak soon after he died. So the first account which has come to us has to be less than 50 years from his death. That would mean at least the possibility that the person who wrote that had met Baba Nanak, and if had not met him personally, he definitely knew people who had met Baba Nanak. So that is the history part.
Thank you.
Sure, please.
Thank you very much for your explanation. It's very, very interesting. I keep thinking about Islam, and there are some similarities there. I would like to read the chat from Marinus, Dr. Marinus. The question for you is that what is the relevant or the relationship between Kabir Das and Baba Nanak?
Could you kindly repeat that, please?
It is on the chat. The question is on the chat. What is the relevant or the relationship of Kabir Das and Baba Nanak?
There is no relationship. Kabir was much before Baba Nanak, though the stories are there that they met, but they are much later stories. There is no likelihood of Baba Nanak meeting Kabir or even knowing about Kabir. But Kabir does come into the Sikh tradition later, as some of his compositions were taken and inducted into Sikh text. But as far as Baba Nanak and Kabir are concerned, I can say it with certainty that they neither met nor did they know each other.
Well, thank you. Anyone else with questions?
I don't want to monopolize if others have questions. I have a question about modern environmental spirituality and Sikhism. As you were just saying recently, how nature is very important in the Sikh tradition. Are there ways in which this is expressed in practical environmental ethics ways these days among Sikhs?
But it's a fascinating question. So I would have a twofold answer to that. One is, when I was a little boy, you'll be surprised that we were told that fields need rest. Does that ring bell somewhere? So this is 1960. We would have the agriculture, the farming was single crop farming. And the rest of the 6 months, we would take care of the fields by having the cattle there, which would, manure the fields. The idea was very strong that fields need rest. So thousands of years, the idea, was still there when I was a little boy. Then in the 1960s, Mr. Borlaug, the Nobel Prize-winning wheat breeder, introduced the new varieties. And but we were introduced to the Green Revolution, and agriculture underwent a sort of radical metamorphosis. So let alone arresting the soil, the Agriculture University created a cycle of 3 crop rotation. and in the past. So this thing started in 1967, and in 50 years, the level of water is gone down by 100 feet. The use of pesticides is probably, I don't have the figure, but 1,000 times or percentage of God knows what, it's shot up, and the land is in deep, deep, deep distress. Certain degree of awakening is coming up. The local religious figures are beginning to think about it. But somehow the forces that came together in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Green Revolution, we were introduced to the Australian eucalyptuses. Goodness gracious, we were told in 7 years they will go up by whatever 40 feet. I don't know whether they went up or not, but they sucked all the water which we had. So it's a very important question that in a way, all that love and affection Nanak had for the environment, and he claims, Nanak sach datar shanakhat kudrati. If you want to see the bounty of the Lord, you have to go and look at nature. His followers, 500 years down the road, has put that thing upside down. I'm sorry to be the bearer of that very sad news,
Well, we must tell the good and the bad of religion, huh?
All right. Any more questions?
Yes, I see one.
Go ahead, Professor Kaprawi.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mann. The inclusion of Sikhism into Dharma religion seems to be good theological foundation for inclusion. Now, I have two questions with regard to that. The first one, as you mentioned, that Sikhism has the role as the sword of Hinduism against conversion. Do the Sikhs feel that they are used by the Hindus in this role? And the second question is with regard to the concern of the Abrahamic religions to go beyond Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions, to be inclusive of other religions. In Islam, for example, we have Al-Biruni, who included Indian religion as part of the Abrahamic religion by including them into the category of the Sabian. Now, the question is if there is such a concern among the Dharma religion as well, and particularly from the Sikh tradition.
Beautiful question, beautiful question. Starting with the latter. So Al-Biruni actually never crossed Lahore. So whatever we know of Al-Biruni's India is Lahore. He was not permitted, Ghazni did not permit him to go around. So he was put in Lahore. So whatever you learn of is the area I'm talking about. So that's one thing. Now, the second thing you raised, this is brilliant again, that the Sikhs are sandwiched between a religion which is inclusive, and as you say, they are declaring them to be their sword arm. On the other hand, they have, in terms of theological links and sociological links, they have more to do with the Western side. But the Western side, you see, the Jews and Christians have been talking about for some years, and then they feel when the Muslims come in, the pluralism project is pretty much taken care of. So the Western side has no intention in understanding the Sikh situation, and the Eastern side is always happy to have them in their arm. But how do the Sikhs feel? So one, what you say is very interesting, that this concept of Dharma religion is relatively recent. Before that, they used to call it the Vedic religion. So, and I haven't looked into it, but it might also be interesting to see that this concept emerged on the North American soil. And there is a foundation in Anwer which are still working on that. What are they trying to do is to create this paradigm of Dharma religions and put it as a counterpart of the Abrahamic religions. So they got 2 Sikh scholars who were happy to join them, and there was a plan to start a journal of Dharma studies. This happened about 15 years ago. And when the news got released, became public within the Sikh community, they were so upset that they called the scholars, and the scholars resigned from the board of governors of that whatever the Dharma foundations. And since then, nothing has been heard of that initiative. While that effort is still there. So, I mean, have I answered your question? The Sikhs say, giving you a very clear position, if we say Baba Nanak has problems with the Jains because they are atheists. Baba Nanak has problems with different segments of Hindus because they have multiplicity of divinities. And then he has problems with the Hindu society because of social hierarchy. Now, on the Muslim side, there is not even a single comment from Baba Nanak, where he would critique Islamic theology. What he does is he questions the way the Muslim leadership is functioning. And what comes in there, they are not taking care of the society, neither are they providing justice to them, nor are they taking care of their social welfare. And what his hope is that Mir Babur has successfully done that in Kabul, and when he comes to Hindustan, he would take care of this. So there is this Dharma inclination to bring Sikhs into their fold is very clear, and that they have their own ways of looking at it. But as far as the Sikhs are concerned, you would always have diversity of opinion, and some people would see it that way. And that takes us into a different issue. I don't mean to take more time, but that takes us into a different issue, because what is taken for granted in scholarship, and which is factually incorrect, that the people who came to join the Sikh tradition were from the Hindu background. That is incorrect. Who were they? 90% of them were people of nomadic stock, which settled in the Punjab area. We have the invention of Persian wheel, with which you could create a gear system and pull water up by 30 to 40 feet. So we see actually in Baburname Babur looks at the Persian wheel for the first time and he's fascinated by that. And where the description of the Persian wheel comes is less than 10 miles from where Nanak had established his community. Babur is coming down from Sialkot to Kalanur, and on the way he sees the well. So the impression which is created is that Sikhs came from the Hindu society. Not correct. They came from nomadic society. Nomads, we have our names. They, in Pakistan area, they became Muslims. In West Punjab, in the central area, they took up the Sikh path. So it's a sort of very, very complicated situation. Scholarship is not clear. Scholars are not clear about things. And so even the issue of their being part of the Dharma tradition doesn't really have any basis. In other words, Sikh Dharam would not, the term, the connection, the two terms, Sikh and Dharam, would never come together until the early decades of the 20th century. And even there, when the Sikhs use it, they seem to be translating the Sikh religion used by some British writers.
Well, thank you very much for our discussion today, Dr. Mann. Thank you for giving us a very enlightening speech and an engaging conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone had learned a lot too. Finally, we come to an end. I would like to thank the organizer here, who are here, Dr. Kaprawi, Dr. Donlin Smith, and also our technician and all participants. Thank you so much for coming today. All the big applause for Dr. Mann. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Have a good day, everyone, and have good lunch. Bye-bye.